Welcome to Timberline Bass Podcast, your place for Wisconsin bass fishing and everything outdoors.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Timberline Bass Podcast. Today we've got a guest on. He's was one of the people I thought of when I started this show. I would argue one of the most interesting men in bass fishing in the state of Wisconsin. Greg Kizewski. He's a longtime tournament angler. Anybody who has been doing this for any amount of time at least knows of Greg, if not knows him. From the jigs, he has 3G smallmouth solutions, makes some of the finest jigs, to running his tournament trail, to events like the St. Jude's. I mean, Greg is such a big part of bass fishing in Wisconsin. So without further ado, here's Greg. How's it going, Greg?
Not bad. How about you?
Not too bad.
Pleasure being on here. Appreciate it.
No, the pleasure is all mine. So I guess starting out, you're such a part of so many different things. I don't even necessarily know where to start. If you kind of want to go through and just give us an idea of the irons you got in the fire.
Well, I've been a tournament angler since the 70s. So it's been a long time. Always enjoyed fishing. My dad took me fishing a lot when I was a kid, and that's one thing that was my deal. I love to fish. And, back in the day, we are so blessed now with the stuff there is to fish. Back then, there was huge limitations, and we didn't have catch and release tournaments early on. It was catch and kill tournaments, and people were bringing bass to the scales with stringers and such. And to see how everything's evolved in such a positive way. And I watched your podcast with Max Walter. He'd be the first to say bass aren't a problem in Wisconsin. If you and I didn't know each other from Adam, and we met at a boat landing and we were walleye fishing for the day, I would say, how did you do? And you'd say, I got 5 eaters. And I would say, yeah, I got 5 eaters too. Now for bass fishing, you say something like, yeah, my biggest 5 were 13 or 14 pounds. They're swimming yet. So it's a different beast, bass fishing. I'm glad the muskie guys have picked up catch and release, because look what's done for that sport. My dad was a muskie fisherman. I worked real jobs, a real job for 20 plus years, and was able to retire at an early age. And my passion's outdoors. If I'm not fishing, I'm hunting. And I decided, well, let's just stay with that world. I don't really want to work for anybody. And I started Super K Jigs. That was my first jig business. And at the same time, about halfway into me owning Super K, Wisconsin made concealed carry a thing. So I started teaching concealed carry classes. Why did I do that? Why would I go to guns and fishing? Every business has peaks and valleys. And what are you going to do when it's not busy in your core business? So my thought process was, I started the tournament circuit, the Upper Midwest Bass Challenge Series. That's going to help me sell jigs. So that's a business. And then I got the jig business to sell the jigs. And then thinking I'm going to have still time on my hands in the dead of winter and such, I started the Concealed Carry and Family Defense Academy. So I'm what's called a training counselor, which means I not only teach classes, but I certify concealed carry instructors. So come to find out that the Upper Midwest Bass Challenge Series was busy enough to be busy all year round. Super K Jigs was busy enough to be busy all year round, and the concealed carry class. So I never had a valley. It was always peaks. But I never been the type to have any grass grow under my feet. I always wanted to stay busy. I enjoy meeting people. Everybody I meet seems to become a lifelong friend. And that's the important thing about the outdoors world to me, is it's a family. And, I guess I'm like the Papa Smurf of this family, because I've been, through longevity, through how long I've been around. I've known your dad for quite a while, super angler, super human being. I wouldn't have known him. I wouldn't have known him. I wouldn't have known you without fishing. So the number of people in my life that I've been blessed because of fishing is huge. So that's it was kind of all encompassing. I've had people get a hold of me. They know that, okay, well, he's got his own businesses. Maybe they can help him. I was at the Skeeter Boat Center when it opened up in Chippewa Falls. I was the general manager there. Found out that, we grew that business fast. And when I started there, it was me as a general manager. And then Chad Larson was my salesman, and we had one tech, and his name was Sean. And to have three people working on there and grow to be like the number 2 skeeter dealer in the world in a state that has ice, 6 months out of the year, you're pretty good. But if you own a golf course, you don't get to golf. If you're a general manager in a boat shop, you don't get to fish. So I stepped aside and retired. That was my first retirement. It was like right after my dad died. And I think your dad would tell you the same thing as I'm going to tell you, because, you're about the age of my kids, is just always remember you can always make more money. You can't make more time. So, family is important. You got to spend every minute you can with them. And that was my goal, is to get back to that mindset. But I still did one more thing that I probably shouldn't have done, because it was a 9-month project. As I went to work for Artisan, I knew some people there, and they wanted to come to market with a propane ice auger, and I was pretty handy with engines, and then I also brought a generator to market too when I was there. But I came up with the idea because we wanted a lightweight propane auger, and anytime you're using propane fuel for power, you're going to lose about 20% of your power. It's not like gasoline. So how do I make a 40 cc auger get more power? Is I decided it would be a good time to raise the wrist pin in the piston and make it higher compression. Build power by higher compression, just like we did with our Go Fasty cars back in the day. So then we were getting more power with the propane than we would have with a 40 cc gas motor. So that was like a 9-month project, and December 2013 was the last time I collected a paycheck from anybody that wasn't one of my customers. So since then, it's been, we shut down the Upper Midwest Bass Challenge Series this year. A lot of people wish I'd bring it back, but it's time. I'm 65 years old, and it's not a young man's. It's more of a young man's thing than it. I want to admit. It's there's bureaucracy involved in tournaments. Everybody wants a piece. It's not like you pull a permit from the DNR and it's done. These municipalities, to hold a tournament in their backyard, they want a piece of the action. How many boats are you bringing here? Okay, here's like if you go to the Minocqua chain and you want to go out of the city of Lake Tomahawk, $50 a day to hold a tournament after everybody's paying $7 at the ramp to launch. So it's how it is. Mohawkson used to be simple. You'd pull a permit and go fishing and have a tournament on Mohawkson. Now the municipality of Mohawkson, if you want to launch at Sarah Park, they want a municipal permit. So if you fished the UMBCS, you would see me at 5 a.m, and you'd see me at 5 p.m, and you'd think that was all there was to it. Nothing farther from the truth. An 8-hour tournament, it takes the guy who runs it about 12 hours that day, and then all the pre-work and phone calls, and I treat everybody like they're my kid. Believe me, when somebody calls me, what time do we have to be there by? What time did you have to be there last year? Did you read the email? So my goal with the UMBCS was to have a stepping stone to bigger tournaments. And proudly, I know it's really nothing to do with me, but I think we ran it as such. It gave people, we got 7 people that fish the UMBCS that are Bassmaster Elite Series anglers.
No kidding.
So you think about that, Austin Felix and Seth Fighter both fished the UMBCS when I had the Minnesota division. You got Nick Trim, you got Pat Schlapper, you got Jay Shakurit, Bob Downey fished with us for years. We also had Josh Douglas fished with us a couple years in Minnesota division. I was literally, for lack of better terms, a dick about the rules. The thing is if you make a rule, the rule needs to be enforceable. And when need be, you enforce the rule. I didn't care if it was a Dalton Shear or somebody I didn't like. If you were not there at 6:30, you didn't fish. I don't care. You left your pills at home. You should have thought about that ahead of time. This is a good learning experience for you. And that's what we did. I'm proud of what we accomplished there. Like I say, it's not something that's on me, but it was such a good group of people that was so highly competitive. It made everybody bring their A game. If you're a bowler and you bowl against a bunch of people with an 80 average and you have 100 average, you still suck, but you look so much better than the people with the 80s. So now, what if you're bowling against everybody that's got a 260, 270 average? That changes it. So you either in your mind, people do tournaments for different things. Some people fish literally to get away from the wife. And I mean, we know that. Some people fish tournaments so they schedule a day to fish. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't go fishing that day. I'm going to fish on Saturday. Saturday comes along and you don't have a tournament and it's drizzling. Do you go out? No. Or
right.
If it's windy. So you're scheduling a time to go fishing. And others like myself fished it for the competitive aspect of it. I used to race late model stock cars. I had that that's how I met my wife. We've been married now 44 years, but it was through racing. Her parents were race fans. And it was a cool thing, but that always had that competitive fire. And what people need to learn, if they haven't learned yet about fishing, is you're not fishing against the anglers, you're fishing against the fish. And it makes your transition from lake to lake, from seasonal pattern to seasonal pattern so much smoother. Never mind that Joe Blow is out there throwing a quickie or this. What's your strength? Find fish that'll bite your strength, because they're there. There's always going to be shallow fish. There's always going to be deep fish. I will not start the big motor in the tournament unless I have 2 shallow patterns and 2 deep patterns, ever. Why? You're never going to have 4 patterns fail. Never. Not in a million years. Never, ever, ever. You got to have it. You got to have that edge. There's a lot better fishermen than me. A lot better fishermen than me. I refuse to be outworked. We're all capable of that. We're all capable of putting in the work. You can have these commitments, jobs and things like that. And, don't give up on that stuff, because that's a sure thing. Guys that are fishing the Elite Series in these big tournaments, they're bunking together to try saving money, and floating seasons on their credit cards, so you got to, do things smart. But, one of the reasons, I had the jig business as well. That paid my entry fees. It paid, I could always sell jigs at the derbies, and it was, it supported my habit and it supported my habit nicely.
Would you say that you got that mindset from your work ethic in your career or from the tournament fishing?
Mom and Dad.
because I mean, your mindset on how you look at things meshes so well in success at life and success at fishing. I mean,
It's
you run a
mom and dad,
business how you fish.
100% mom and dad, Dalton, 100% mom and dad. You know, my parents were the hardest working human beings I knew, and they never made us do anything. I have two sisters. They never said, okay, you got to do this, you got to do that, or you got to have a job. I got my first job when I was 10 years old. And I asked my dad wasn't the hunter. He couldn't kill anything. But I told my dad I wanted to hunt. And he said, well, you better find yourself a job and earn money to buy a gun. And when you're 12 years old, we'll go get that gun. So 10 years old, I started working at the local grocery store, stocking shelves, sweeping, taking dead mice out of traps back in the room. And if that guy was alive now, he'd be totally kicking me for saying that he had mice in the building. But I worked because I had that goal. You know, for everything, you have to be goal oriented. You know, what's the goal with anything? What's the goal with a marriage? You know, we want to be happy, we want to be married, we want to have kids, we want to own our house, not be too deep in debt. What's things that make a marriage fail? You know, usually it's money, infidelity. You know, probably the two biggest things. It's stuff that, looking at it going in, you can set your goals to avoid those things and live it out. But for everything I do, I got a goal. Everything, 100%. And I don't want to achieve the goal. I want to knock it out of the park. So it's got to be a stretch goal. So if I can tie 300 jigs a day, okay, tomorrow I'm going to tie 400. That's my stretch goal. It's going to take me longer. My hands are going to be sore, but I'm going to get it done because it's a stretch goal. You know, I got to make we got the 3 Lakes tournament coming up, and I need the entry fee for this and that, and I'm never going to take that out of the bank or put it on a credit card. I sell some jigs. So everything is based around a goal, whether it's life or fishing or hunting. And I love hunting. You know, my house is a shrine to the white-tailed deer. It's a lot of art. You know, I only have a few deer mounted, but there's a lot of deer art here. I like live scenes of deer. I mean, it's an important thing to me, and I always set a goal each year. I go out and I scout hard, and I choose one deer to chase. That's what I do, and I've got 120,000 acres out my back door, and I find the deer. And how is he identifiable right now? He's got because it's just starting to grow pedicles, you know, starting to get some rack. He's got a chip in his right front hoof. So I can tell by the track, okay, now here's what he's doing here. So, but it's back to that thing, being goal oriented, 100%. You know, you take mom and dad's work ethic and you put it into your own life, and everything's a goal. What's a goal in your job? You know, goal in the job is to, you know, used to be that I always treated people in a work environment of needs improvement, meets requirements, or superior. And what you find at the end of the day, if you took 100 people sample in any business, 10 people suck. They need improvement. 10 people, and everybody knows them 10 people that suck because they create work for anything. In a business environment, any word with the word re in it is a bad thing. Rework, redo, you know, re is a bad thing. So everybody knows the top 10% because they're so good. They're the ones that bail out that bottom 10%. But the people that keep the doors open, that meet requirements, is that 80% of people in the middle that, you know, we got to make sure we give them goals. Okay, if they do this, you know, let's make sure we spiff them or that. So, you know, because people no longer come with built-in goals or an attempt at goals. You need to give them goals, whether that's your children, yourself in your personal life, at work. If you have a goal and try to achieve the goal, it keeps your mind occupied on how I'm going to do it, and you find a way to do it without cheating a system.
Right. With as many years as you have been tournament fishing, you said you started in the 70s. What has been your goal or your driving force there to stay in it for that many years and still love it after that long?
That the competitive fix. I have some people that have turned into very good friends that we used to hate each other fishing because we were not very nice. You'd set the boat down and you start fishing, and somebody be 50 yards out and you start screaming at them. You see, I'm going that direction, just being obnoxious. It's not that important. It's a fish. It's not that important. How can a boat draw be that important to some people? It's mind-boggling. I've been fishing tournaments forever, Dalton. One time I've won off my starting spot. Now, granted, there's times where your starting spot, you caught 3 key fish or 2 key fish that you wouldn't have won otherwise. But I can only say one time in that career that every fish came off that starting spot and I never really had to leave it. And if I wouldn't have got there, I would have been in trouble. And one of the reasons I refuse to go into a derby without having 4 patterns is so if I'm boat number 12 and I get to the spot, everybody's so good. If you think that you're going to have them fish to yourself, you're in for a long day. Everybody's so good now. Your era, you can look at YouTube, you can look at a podcast like yours and learn something from it. You know how long it took me to learn how to tie a Palomar knot? I didn't have nothing to look at. So, you'd see a drawing on the back of a Berkeley big game spool of monofilament and go there, and you'd always end up wrong. I mean, it was weeks, when I think about, Shitek chain was my home water for a long time. And it took me 20 years to find the juice in a Shitek chain. And then side imaging comes out. And, side imaging, rather than, complain about it, I embraced it. And my partner at the time, his name was Steve Crotto, and he's a chiropractor from Rice Lake, Wisconsin. We went to, I think it was Mark Twain Reservoir. Yeah, it was Mark Twain Reservoir. And we fished with Doug Varenberg, who was Humminbird Pro Staffer. This was in 06. This was cutting edge, just when side imaging was coming out. And we were with him for 2 hours, and we both said, okay, we got to have that. And the first time I put it to work was at the Wisconsin Bass Classic. And I side imaged all of Lake Tomahawk. And out of the 3,600 acres, I was finding fish in the water column in 57 to 60 feet of water. And I said, we'll have these fish to ourselves. So let's figure out a way to catch them. And we did. And we won by, Pat Schlapper and Rob Yule were second with 5 pounds behind us. We smoked them in a 2-day thing. We had a good derby, but we had to fizz every fish. There was a lot of fish care because you're catching fish that deep and you're going to kill them. It was stressful, but to catch fish that none of them had a scar in their mouth, So how many times are we driving over fish that'll never get caught? And if you look what's happening on the Elite Series, say what you want about forward facing. I'm sure you could have 8 shows about it. Say what you want about it, but it's making us learn more about fishing.
Absolutely.
Forward facing's an incredible tool for somebody that makes jigs. I can see how they're reacting to my colors, and that's what I use it for. I mean, literally, okay, if I hit that stump, it don't matter what color, If I run a swim jig by that stump, fish is going to crush it. It's going to be a reaction bite. What's going to make that fish move 6 feet off the stump to get my bait? It's got to look like something that swims, something that they're feeding on. It's got to be something special about it. And I've got a power pole, one of the tall seat poles with a vise on it. So I got it in my boat and, cast out there, and fish won't even look at it. Add 3 strands of orange. Still won't look at it. Okay, let's go with a little bit of chartreuse. Come out and crush it. All right. Okay, now we're on to something. It's that little stuff that I think everybody's capable of, but like every post I make on the 3G Smallmouth Facebook page, what does it say? It says details matter. They matter all the time.
And I think that's why your jigs and the things you make have such a following, because if you do, when you look at anything you make, the couple strands, like you said, a chartreuse or orange, something guys normally wouldn't think of, and to take the time and do that kind of research,
Yeah.
I mean, there's passion there.
Well, it's never random. Fish are eating something for a reason. A reaction strike is random. But what are our 3 phases of a fish? We have a negative, we have a neutral, and we have a positive feeder. Anybody can catch a positive feeder. Some people have trouble coercing a neutral fish to eat, become a positive feeder. What can I do to ignite a school of negatives? And it could be a few strands of this, or it could be a few strands of that, or throwing a jigging spoon into the school and ripping it and getting that first one to bite. Then everybody else is going, well, he's the only one eating. I'm going to, that triggers the whole school. And I love fishing smallmouth. And they're such opportunistic feeders. You really, when you have them windows, those bite windows, and you've turned a neutral or negative feeder into a neutral or positive feeder, you have minutes and it's going to go back negative. You need to put those fish in the boat and get the business taken care of. I used to fish when I fished, like I talked about Steve, one of my first tournament partners. He was always so busy with the chiropractic office that I did a lot of the pre-fishing, and I would have to fish for 5 fish because we needed 5 fish in the boat for him to calm down. Then he could have a dip and a can of Coke, and he'd be happy. He'd be in his happy spot. In my world now, I fish for 5 big bites. And if it takes me all day to find those 5 big bites, it's a hero or zero game. It's I don't care. I'm not in it for notoriety or anything like that. I've had, I don't know how many times where I just want to dump my fish because you just have a bad day. It happened on a Minocqua chain. Brian Harmon and I fished a derby out there. I don't remember what year. It was when Cabela's came to town, and we had 10 pounds, and it was a tough day. And we had a couple plunking fish come off, and I went up to. I said, I'm going to go just turn in our tag, and we'll take those fish away from shore and dump them. I go in and all these people are coming up, 0, 0. I'm looking at the board and there's a lot of 1 fish, 2 fish. I'm going, oh God, okay, let's weigh them. We got 3rd place, So, and that was like me being, negative, down on it. We had a bad day, but just because you're having a bad day doesn't mean everybody else didn't have a bad day either. So, you gotta take those as wins. And, sometimes when you're big fish hunting, you end up coming in with 10 pounds because the big fish didn't go. And then halfway through the day or 3/4 of the way through the day, you go, we need to get some fish in the box, as you go fish for some 14, 15 inches. And now you got 5, and then things start turning around. Robin and I had that on Nokomis last year when we won one, 10 o'clock, we had 1 fish in the box. We went and started fishing some docks. built up to a limit, like 11-pound limit. And then we start working our strength and going back, rerunning the stuff that we started on. And we won by 3 pounds. We had 17 and a half, 18 pounds, and 14 pounds was second place. So a lot of times people will abandon the fish that they find, and sometimes it's just a matter of boat angle or it's completely meaningless to me to spend a lot of time pre-fishing prior to 7 a.m. or after 3 p.m. if you're derby 7 to 3. Unless you're just doing nothing besides scanning. Are we after? Wouldn't that suck if you found the mother lode, but they were evening fish or early morning fish, and then they abandon? And some of these Wisconsin River impoundments are exactly that way. Mohawkson, there's so many times in Mohawkson where your bite window's until 9 a.m. and then 9 to 1 there's nothing, and then it happens again. There's some strange bodies of water on these Wisconsin River impoundments. It's a completely new learning curve, and that's kind of one of the things that's intriguing to me about bass fishing, because it's a constant learning curve. There was a day in my time, and I'm older than your dad, and your dad would vouch for this, where people would come up north fishing, and they go to the Rod and Gun and say, "I just want to sell me something to go catch some fish," and they'd sell them 2 white buzz baits, 2 white chartreuse buzz baits, 2 white spinner baits, and 2 white chartreuse spinner baits. And that's what people threw all week long. You think you could, for years, you couldn't get bit on a spinner bait because that's all they saw. And they might have a brain the size of the pea, but if they saw Fred disappear one day when he chased one of those white things and they never saw him again, if it hurts when you do that, they're probably not going to do that anymore.
Yeah.
They're not that stupid, and that's why I'm way more of a swim jig guy in the real world. And I've kind of gotten away from a bait caster a little bit. I threw it quite a bit the last couple derbies, but my shoulders are such where they're not very functional. I mean, a lot of ibuprofen involved to stay functional. So I do probably 95% of my damage with a spinning rod now, and I just look for a different kind of fish. Something that, if you look at the spawn, for instance. So how long is the spawn? Well, they make the beds and the female come up, and somewhere between 18 and 36 hours, that's your window that she's up there. And then she disappears, goes back to the first drop. And then the male stays in about 2 weeks until fry are born. He guards fry, and then he's off. So because that's happening, it doesn't mean all fish in the lake are spawning at the same time. So what sees the most sun? What's going to be the warmest water? Northwest portion of the lake or river is going to be the warmest water. It sees the most sun exposure all day. So that's where the spawn should start. So if you go out in the spring and looking for them early fish, you go to the northwest. If nothing there, you back off to a secondary point. Okay, they're here. So in 2 days from now, they're going to be up there. So 3 weeks from now, when they're done even guard and fry, south side of the lake now has got some spawning activity. Just it's not all over in 18 to 36 hours. There's still spawners to be caught. And if you chase them around and follow the seasonal pattern and follow water temperature gauge, what's your, I'll ask you a question. I'll switch. What's the most important thing for you with electronics?
Probably trying to figure out how to use them effectively in each situation, I think.
Awesome.
Because there's times when 2D still is just as important as the forward facing, in my opinion.
100%. And here's why I even asked you the question is, if you asked me, the next question was out of your mouth, and you go ahead and ask me, what could you not live without in the boat? I couldn't live without good mapping.
Yep.
I couldn't live without good mapping, because the mapping is so good now, so much better than it's ever been, that I can see the offshore humps. I don't even know if I need depth, as long as I can, because the mapping is so close. And then I can throw a Carolina rig on that shelf and pull it down. Okay, there's the first drop, there's the second drop. Mapping is so good, and when you're looking at these like large flats, no secret that I like fishing for big smallies. And I only got one over 8 this year, but like last year I had several over 8. My biggest was at 8.35. I picked the biggest flat on a lake, as long as that flat has really tight contour lines off of it, like some steep drops. I know somewhere on that flat they're going to go up to feed and then fall back. It's textbook. I mean, it's 100% textbook. So, that mapping is so important. So important.
So when you're fishing those flats, are you looking for a specific bottom composition or just a flat with a tight drop?
Well, for largemouth, you want black bottom, hard black bottom preferably. I like, for smallies, I like pea gravel or scattered rock about the size of coffee cans, harder bottom. Now there's a phenom going on in the Wisconsin River impoundments, and I hope Robin doesn't shoot me if he watches this, but kind of found it last year that the number of smallmouth that matter in the Wisconsin River as far as tournament fish that are in 2 foot of water or less in weeds, in crappy, cruddy weeds, is unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. I found them completely on accident last year. I was fishing a contour line off of a large flat, and there was weeds. It looked like a largemouth flat, but I knew there were some smallies on this drop off. Fished them, and all I was getting was peanuts. And this was like about 2:00 in the afternoon. I had a pretty decent fish on, and it was a drop shot fish, so I scooped it up in the net and was taking it off, and the wind was blowing pretty hard, and the boat drifted up on top of this crap, and I looked down, and there's a green, pussy crap weed, and I'm going, oh boy, as I got a Garmin trolling motor, and they don't do weeds as well as like an Ultrex do, but unless you put an Ultrex prop on them. Started kind of working my way out of there, and I saw looked like bluegills eating bugs off the water, just little pops. And I'm going, that's kind of strange. So I threw a top water out there, caught a 4.5 smallie. So I kept the trolling motor on high, and in a course of about 300 yards, I had 5 fish that were over 4 pounds. So I'm going, but nobody ever fishes this. Nobody. I mean, it's just too hard. It's just too hard to fish. And every time you caught one, they didn't go straight up in the air to try to throw the bait. They went dug down into the crap. So there was a project getting all that green crap off, but that was repeatable river system to river system to river system all year. And that's not something I ever targeted. And I know I've tried it before. But they adapt and do their thing. What does it come down to? Where's the food? Where's the food? If there's a professor at University of Wisconsin La Crosse years ago when Joni and I got married, that was in '82. We lived in La Crosse. So I spent a lot of time on the Mississippi River, and there was Dr. Marty Veneman. He was a professor at UW La Crosse. He was a professor of biology, and he did a smallmouth study on the river in La Crosse. Did transmitters, put them in by the dorsal fin, and tracked them. And the key takeaway was that a river smallmouth bass has been like in a Wisconsin River, and I'm sure the Mississippi River, I'm sure the Wisconsin River, they'll spend so much of their life, like 90% of their life, in water shallower than 3 feet. So we always, back prior to that, we were fishing deep for smallies, deep rock, edges of wing dams where there was a deep drop off and things of the sort. And the super interesting thing, besides how shallow those fish could survive, was the bait. A school of shad could move overnight, and a smallie could move 7 miles in 24 hours. And you wonder why that fish is not there the next day after you found them pre-fishing the day before. It didn't move to across the cove because the wind was blowing that direction. It might have been shad chasing shad. Your crayfish eating smallies are much more stable because to find that crayfish population is a lot easier. And the crayfish their hatches once a month, 3 days prior to 3 days after a full moon. So why are we not always dragging baits 3 days prior to 3 days after a full moon? That's what we need to be doing, but we keep blocking out basic science, and you can't do it. We make it sometimes more difficult than it really needs to be.
Do you see that a lot with because I'm sure you get a lot of custom orders, colors and stuff for jigs, where you get an order and you're just kind of like, why would you do that?
No, I never question it. I'll question one of the biggest questions I always have is the things that people try to do with like a Ned. And I make that Ned that's got a little wire weed guard on it, and I've kind of switched over to that. But when I first started making the thing I call the Ned cricket, skirting a Ned, I was putting on a full tab of silicone, and I still do that. I take a piece of silicone, cut it in half. I put a half of that on the back and half of that on the stomach, and it looks kind of sparse on there, and you don't really need much more than that because you're typically trailing with like a little craw or like a Z-Man TRD, finesse TRD. But I started getting more and more people that would say, I want 8 strands of silicone. So where do you come up with that number? That number of eight strands. You can't make that up. So they had to have been doing it. So then I would question, okay, why 8? Well, I was throwing this swim jig out there once about 3 years ago, and the Northern's just about ate all the material off, but the hook was still good. So I kept chucking it and had a grub behind it. And the more material was missing, the more I was getting bit. Well, what looks more like a perch swimming through the water, a swim jig with a bunch of material on it, or a swim jig with a 5-inch grub on it? The swim jig with the 5-inch grub on it.
Yep.
Yeah. So I pay attention. I've never given away anybody's secret juice or anything like that because I've really never used it myself because I have my own I fish my own particular way. I've had people try to give me waypoints in the past, and I just don't want it. I want to find it on my own. I want to know if Dalton gave me all his waypoints, was the waypoint the boat position or what I'm throwing at? Or if it was boat position, is the boat 6 feet to the north or 6 feet to the south, or which direction am I throwing and stuff? I want to find my stuff. And Dalton said, try Jackson Bay. That's they're in there thicker than snot, and that's 100 acres. I'll figure it out. So I'm not a fool, but I'll take a hint like that. But I've never, I have to fish my way, or, you got to have confidence in what you're doing. You have to. And it's a difficult thing if you don't have confidence to keep your head in the game for 8 hours in a derby. You always have to be expecting a bite. Otherwise, when you get the bite, you ain't gonna hook the fish, or you're gonna make some key mistakes.
And I definitely, earlier in the conversation when you said, people got to get that mindset that it's you versus the fish.
Mm-hmm.
Most days I feel like it's me versus me because I get in my way more than anybody or anything can.
Yep. No, I totally agree with that. And it's so much of a head game out there. It really is. Henry Ford said it way before both of our times put together, is whether you think you're wrong or you think you're right, you're correct. If you don't think something's going to happen, it won't. If you stay positive and think there's got to be a fish there. One of my most unique experiences was way back when Bassmasters had the weekend series. Fished a tournament and I ended up blowing my motor, so I never got to weigh my fish. But it was on Lake Winneconne, and I needed one more fish. I had 4 fish, but my 4 fish were 16 pounds. I needed one more fish. A 14-inch fish is 1.45 to 1.50. I need that 4th fish. And I'm talking to myself, there's in this one bay, there was one stick sticking up. Well, what Winneconne is like, you can see people standing in 500 yards offshore and water up to their knees, wiping off the side of their boat, So if there's nothing else around except for that stick, if there's a bass around, it's going to stop there. It's an ambush point. I threw at that son of a gun Dalton for 30 minutes, caught a 4-pounder.
No kidding.
Because I knew there had to be one there. It probably wasn't there when I started throwing, but at some point there was going to be a fish there. And finally I hit the right angle, or maybe the wind shifted enough or whatever. I don't know, but I caught it. And if you second guess yourself, that's what causes the biggest trouble. So you're right. You're 100% right that you can't be fishing against yourself and the fish, because it makes for a long day.
And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with, because at the end of the day, I feel like there's a lot of self-discipline involved with that. It's not easy to maintain a good attitude.
No. And how many days are you pre-fishing? Like we fished. Greg Hayes and I fished the St. Jude this year, and I didn't do the weigh-in. I wanted to fish it sometime before I die. It was on my bucket list, and pre-fish for 7 or 5 days in the tournament, 2 days. That's a lot of days in a row fishing. And we had a thing going. You had to have flow, and you had to have less than a foot of water, and you could get bit on a piece of wood. And this is pretty solid, because one day we had like 26 pounds and during pre-fish. I go, this is pretty solid, because everywhere that we do this thing, and based on the direction of the flow, and if it's set up like that, you could call your shot. Like any other derby, what happens derby day? All of a sudden it's 36 degrees first day. So what's a fish going to do if they're up shallow? Yeah, move out. So we didn't have a terrible boat draw, like 41 or 42, because 41, and we raised $10,000. So we went to that shallow stuff, and I 2 casts into it, I'm going, I'm not seeing any life. There's no minnows, no nothing. It just seems dead. And a boat pulled up to the point. This was in the mouth of Peterson Lake. Guy pulls up on a point and commences to jack in 22 pounds on that point. So they moved off to that point. They did what they were supposed to do. it's never where the fish are. What are they going to do if something changes?
Yep.
Because you can almost guarantee it that something's going to change. And so then after 5 days of pre-fishing, and we tried to salvage that day. We had 15 and a half, 16 pounds, and then the next day went a little worse even. We had number 6 on, and it was about 4.5, 5 pound smallie, and it came unbuttoned just before it got within the net's reach. So it was one of them days where, that tournament, it's hard to have the right mindset too, because it's so exciting helping them kids.
Yep.
It's so exciting. You go to that banquet at night and you hear the stories, and you're in a different mindset. And you tell yourself, there's part of you that's going, I just want to win. I want to win. I want to win. I'm competitive. I want to win. And there's other part of you that's going, everybody here's a winner.
Yep.
100% of them. Everybody already won. We raised $1.37 million before we left the bank. We won, so it's not something you're even down on yourself about, so otherwise you'd have gone back to the motel or wherever you're staying that after the first night and go, we got to throw the whole rule book out. But we didn't. We went and did the same damn thing, except this time when we got there that boat that whacked them the day before was already there. So but it was a fun tournament, and one thing I guess the comment I can make is every tournament I learned something. So have a short memory that a fish with a brain the size of a pea beats you. Have a long memory about why it beat you, and just keep if you make yourself a little better every time out, you learn something each time. By the time you're 65, you don't need 5,000 casts a day. You need 400 quality casts.
Yeah.
It's not working smarter. And it's nothing to do with me being smart. It's the times I got beat, I learned. Because that doesn't feel good. You think about that thing. All it does, it should be so simple. All they do is eat and swim around and try not to get killed. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
What do they need? They need water and food. We're trying to supply the food. We need to find what water they're in. And why is it that tough?
And I think a lot of us get really into the weeds, almost personifying them to a certain extent. Like you said, they're a simple creature. We make them out to be so much more than they are.
Yeah. It's not that. It's not. It shouldn't be that difficult, but it is. I put eyes on almost all my jigs, not the skipping jigs, but people say, why do you put eyes on it? Everything. I don't put eyes on Neds. I don't put eyes on skipping jigs, but everything that a fish eats has eyes. So I want eyes on it, and a lot of people, when they order jigs from me, I want to order those next level jigs, but don't put eyes on. I don't care what I don't know. It's easier for me to not do the eyes, but I think eyes. Can a fish see the eyes, from 6 feet? Probably not. It would have to be pretty gin clear water, but if it's in my head, it matters.
Yep.
If I think it has to be, it has to be. Otherwise, it's how many casts am I going to go? If I gave you 18 different colors of jigs, and you got bit on the first color you used, and you kept using it, then I'd say, well, how'd you do with them jigs? And you'd say, that Kizewski is just an amazing color. I just whacked the snot out of them on there. I catch 90% of my fish on the Kizewski. Why is that, Dalton?
Because that's what you're throwing.
It's something that comes in. It's in your head, and that's what colors are a lot in people's heads. There's, to me, color really matters to get a neutral or negative fish to go. What's going to make him move off that stump 6 to 10 feet to grab your bait? It needs to look something like they're foraging,
Yeah. Well, and I think too, especially nowadays, you kind of touched on like the koiki and stuff like that. It feels, and I know bass fishing's always been that way, but it really feels like an arms race right now for the next big thing. Every week I see it on Facebook all the time. This is huge in Japan. You better get them before you can't.
Yeah.
I catch more fish on a flipping jig and a shaky head than I do any of that new stuff.
Exactly. And I've got a Ned in my hand most of the time now, or it's like the magic ball head or something like that. It's what I feel comfortable throwing. I saw today on Facebook, somebody had one koiki for $300, $300, and they listed it, and people are going back and forth. And I put a picture of my ball head, with the living rubber. That's the dice head. And I said, you can have 60 of those for the same $300. And it's already got a hook and a weight on it, I'm mind boggled. And then somebody said, look on eBay. And I did. $250, $300 for one of these quickies. It's like I'm beside myself. That's a rod and reel. There's so many better ways to spend your money on that. But I think there's been a lot of research done, and Robin just mentioned it to me when we were pre-fishing otter here yesterday. Was it a Monday? That with the research he did on them, that they excel in areas where there's a lot of fishing pressure. The koiki does. So
yeah.
If they're used to seeing a lot of different baits, you look at like, Major League Fishing and, a lot of these circuits where they're going for numbers of fish. A lot of times they're throwing a wacky rig Senko or a shaky head or a simple worm bait so they can catch their 1.5, 2 pounder. The fish are seeing a lot of that stuff. And you put something, to me, they look like water mines back from World War II, those big mine things. And I've used them. I've got a good friend that makes them, and I've done well with them. Would I pay $300 for them? Not in a million years. And would it be? Where would it fall into my arsenal? I would guess. I would probably. I'd even have more crankbaits in the boat before I'd worry about that thing. And I used to fish crankbait a lot, and I just don't much anymore. And that part of it's my shoulder thing. But when we've been up here for 10 years, and the crankbait bite is spotty, I blame Kevin Van Dam for ruining that.
Yeah.
There was many years, where he was mopping everybody up with a crankbait, and all of a sudden. Everybody's buying up everything for crankbaits. I fell into the trap a little bit. I threw more of the Rapala, like the DT series, because you put 12 pound fluorocarbon line on a DT10, he's almost guaranteed 10 feet. Yeah, there's not much in between. And I bought some Strike King ones. They're made in Costa Rica or whatever. And it's just someone that only have one eyeball. The other eyeball's laying in the package. And I'm going. An awful lot of money for a one-eyed fish,
Yep.
But it's to your point, is they're not. They're not real smart, but we can definitely become our own worst enemy. You can't argue about the power of advertising or sales based on BASS or Major League Fishing. If the Johnson boys didn't finish 1-3 in the last derby with koikis, or one throwing a koiki and one of them with whatever they were throwing, would somebody be getting $300 for them? It's 9 of the top 9 people in the top 10 throwing a quickie. I think Schlapper was the only one just flipping a jig. So,
That's unreal.
So it's the power of suggestion, I guess, but it is a powerful thing. You watch somebody use it, and you remember more what the spot was they caught it on, and how it laid. Was it on wood? Was it on what was it? Okay, docks, and these docks all have 8 feet of water to 20 feet of water on the end of it. So forget the shallow docks, forget the real deep docks, and focus on this, and you flip your jig in there, and you probably wouldn't suck.
Well, and that $300 quickie thing kind of makes me feel pretty foolish. Me and Dad were down at the Classic this year, and we were a couple of the clowns standing in line. We each got 2 of them
2
one
packs.
day.
Yeah. Robin told me about that too.
I gave one of them to Grant Neubauer, and I kept one for myself to use, and I re-spooled a rod for the year, and it was my first braid to fluorocarbon leader I tied on, and I must have tied it wrong in my first cast with it. I sent that sucker flying out in Miller Dam.
The FG knot or the Alberta?
Yeah, I managed to mess up an Alberto.
Okay, yeah. That's why I won't tie an FG, because it takes me forever, and I usually doesn't last. So
yeah,
some people, but I can't. It's a knot I can't tie in the wind. I fumble around with it a lot. So the Alberto is what I do. And I do a lot of with the spinning rods, a lot of fluoro or braid to fluoro. I usually, like in a hair jig rod, I'll use Seaguar Smackdown 10-pound, the lime green, the bright ones, and then I put about a 9-foot leader of. It depends what's going on, but if you want to use, if you got a bug hatch going on, you want to use fluorocarbon, because fluorocarbon floats, and you want to keep high in the water column. Mono floats. Sorry, I'm talking ahead of myself. You want to use mono fluorocarbon if you want to run lower in the water column. But like when there's a bug hatch going on, like Boom or a lot of these lakes or Wisconsin River impoundments, if you take that little 3/32 hair jig, the brown one, and spray it with Scotch Guard, that's a waterproof treatment. You cast it out there, it just sits on top of the water. So as long as you're using fluorocarbon, and then you can just twitch it, and then the hair just does this. What makes a hair jig sink is when it gets saturated with water. So because it's got a little bit of lead to 3/32, it'll be head down slightly. So you hook them up 100% of the time. They come up and grab it because they think it's a mayfly, and you got them.
No kidding.
But about 6-pound. I use Berkeley XL for mono because it's pretty limp and subtle, and it does well on an Alberto knot, and then 10-pound Seaguar Smackdown on that. And then like for Neds, I'll use 16-pound Smackdown with fluorocarbon, like 8-pound fluorocarbon abrasics. I'm not tied to Seaguar in any stretch of the imagination. They're not sponsored by them, but they've been in the business a long time. It's almost like, why did I choose Garmin? First of all, Humminbird made me mad, but the most important thing was, I said earlier, maps are the most important thing to me. Who's been in the navigation business the longest?
Garmin.
So if you feel comfortable enough with that, Mr. Garmin, to put that system in an aircraft, I feel okay having your navigation system in my boat, and it's a big deal to me. I tease people that if I was to say my neighbor made me real mad, and I had some friends high up in the government, I wanted to send a missile to the house next door. Sure in hell wouldn't be off of a Humminbird waypoint, because there's a pretty good chance it's going to land on my house.
Yeah.
I feel pretty good about Garmin, but everybody's got their strengths. Humminbird forever has been the leader in side imaging. Their side imaging looks so good. Now Garmin, since they've got the GT56 transducer, is equal to me or not better. I don't think you can ever top the 2D of Lowrance. I don't think a lot of people have tried, nobody's come close.
Right.
It's just that outstanding. So, but I think technology is good for us. It's driving people to build more for less. When I bought my first side imaging unit, a little 797 5-inch screen was $1,000.
No kidding.
First ones. I left Mark Twain Reservoir with a 797 for $1,000 and an 1197 that was $2,200. So for that old, it wasn't old technology at the time, and it paid for itself in 2 derbies, but because nobody else had it. But it's, it sure made me learn things. It forced me to use a map better and following contour lines and, see what things are. And like when I see something different, like on a river, Wisconsin River or Mississippi River, if I see something different and wondering if something is rock or a shell bed, I'll take a Carolina rig and take the sinker on a Carolina rig and turn it around so the flat part of the sinker is facing me. So when I cast out and bring it back, that flat part of the sinker's if it's shells, it's going to catch the shells and roll it over. And you can actually tell, okay, there's about 3-inch shells because the effort it took to get over there. So the shell beds have traditionally held some pretty good fish, as when the water's warming up and throughout. Algae and stuff doesn't do well on shells. You can get algae and stuff on rocks a lot more than shells. So shells are a big part of my game.
Yeah, I would have never thought of doing that with the Carolina rig sinker.
I just do a lot of stupid, simple stuff with Dalton. If it's easy, it's got me written over it.
Well, and I think one of the biggest things people overlook, like too, with the mapping is the safety side of things. Yep. I mean, I can't imagine running around back before mapping was a thing the way we do now. With confidence.
No, I think about how much respect I've got for my dad now, running around the Chippewa flowage like he did in the dark. Everything looks the same. All them islands, and there's stuff everywhere. Rocks and logs and deadheads, and never hit a thing with me in the boat. How did he do that? And now I always do I color any water that's shallower than 2 feet. So if it's coming up, I can do something about it. People think that I gotta have I don't even run a through hull transducer or a 2D transducer. I just use the big transducers with GT56. Once it says a foot on it's too late.
Yeah,
it's too late. You shut it down and you're going to bury a lower unit right in something. So you might as well just go. It's just 0 point.
I think that's one of my all-time favorite quotes is you only got to miss it by a 1/4 inch.
Yeah. There's little things you can do to make yourself safer. Like on this Wisconsin River, you can still get, what pool levels are at. There's enough dams. What is there? It's like 14 dams, from up here all the way down to south of Point. So you can look at what the water stage is, or where the river level's at. So with this technology, if you pull the boat off the trailer and clear the current track, so it's going to be fresh, because there's always going to be 50,000 track points. So the last 8 places you've been have probably got a track stored on there. So you clear a current track when you pull the boat off the trailer. If you had a good day, found some fish and didn't hit anything, you save the track at the end of the day. You go on the NOAA.gov website and you look at what the river stage is for that pool. If the river stage is 7.4, name that track 7.4. Next time you're out, if it's 7.4 or above, it says valid track. if river stage is now 6 feet, you're starting over. Don't follow that track. Be gentle to your equipment. Well, to finish first, what's got to happen? You got to first finish. You can't be up there broken.
I don't know how much time you've spent on like Miller Dam and Otter. Them are the two that always come to mind for me that are safe. The vast majority of places you can go, but there's a handful of areas that if you don't know where you're going, you better not be hot dogging around.
I was on Otter for the first time Monday, and there's a lot of wood up on the surface in 8-9 feet of water. And it was like, it's pucker time when you see that kind of stuff, On Miller Dam, there's not as much wood as there is a lot of shallow stuff. And it's a Miller Dam, I fished it for years and years and years and always did well there because it's usually you can get something going in the rice on the north end with a swim jig, Yeah. I always felt like if I chucked the right color swim jig all day, I got a puncher's chance in any derby.
Yep.
It's you're going to get some quality bites, but you're going to get a limit. When you're points fishing, you need to concern yourself with getting a limit. So I've done well on Miller Dam. They had that fish die off several years ago, and but it's back with a vengeance with some big fish. So we have a derby out there with Lincoln County. I think it's in July, so August. So I'm looking forward to that. But Otter, I got a derby coming up there Saturday, so we'll see. I'll give you a full report.
You'll have to let me know. I haven't touched that yet this year, and that place in the last 3 years has been a completely different lake every year.
I didn't expect it to look like the Chetek chain. The water was green, and all the wood had a snotty stuff on it. You couldn't flip.
Yep.
You had to throw a moving bait. So there was, I guess the west side of the lake had some clear water where you could throw a net or a beaver or something around and not get snotted up. Almost everywhere is not good. And there was a few other boats that weren't in our derby that were out fishing, and I'm going, that's a little weird. I mean, there's only one permit pulled, and then we found out that the Stanley Sportsman's Club's holding a derby there this weekend too. So, how big of a carrying capacity can a body of water have with 660 acres? So, but
it fishes big for what it is, but it doesn't take long to choke that out.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. I mean, it's going to be interesting because it's going to be, there's so many fish out there that are in that 15 and a half to 16 and a half inch category right now that, somebody could catch one kicker fish and blow it completely out of the water. I see a lot of 16-inch fish getting caught, but not many big bags. So.
Right. Well, and the sad thing is that's probably the lake I've spent the most time on around here. Dad was always pretty synonymous with Otter. That was every Saturday thing when we didn't have a derby. Just the way that lake has evolved in the last 20 years that I can remember. It used to be a deep bite that you didn't stand a piper's chance in hell if you weren't sitting on a hump out there. And now we had to beat the bank for the first time in 20 years last year. That was the only way you could get a fish.
Yeah. It definitely is one of them bodies of water that, if you knew nothing about it and you went out there and you have a lot of fishing knowledge, you could easily skip over the basics and miss the bite. You could try to force something to happen in 8 to 12 feet of water. That's just not going to happen. And not that they're not there somewhere, but breaking it down in 6 hours, it's not going to happen. But I kind of like them kind of derbies because everybody's got a puncher's chance. You know, you could fall on a point at any given time and just load the boat on 5 casts and go from, if you don't lose your head. You know, if you don't, go lose your head and load up early or something. But it's gonna be interesting. I'm looking forward to that. So see what happens.
Yeah. Alrighty, well, Greg, I greatly appreciate your time, and I told you about an hour. I don't want to keep you too much longer.
Yeah. I appreciate being on it, and anytime. So.
Sounds good. I'm sure I will bug you this fall, and if you ever got anything you've got a burning need to come talk about too, let me know. I love talking to you. It's a blast.
You got it, brother. Let's get fishing one of these days.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much, Greg.
All right. Thank you. Have a good one, Dalton.
Yep. Bye.
Bye-bye.
All righty, folks. That was Greg Kizewski. Everybody check out his Facebook page, 3G Smallmouth Solutions. Makes some of the finest jigs. Great flipping jigs. His Ned jigs are phenomenal. The skirted ones he talks about, that's one of my big BFS things. And when he says the attention to detail, he genuinely means it. So definitely give him a look. If you got any interest, reach out and put it in order. Thank you for watching the Timberline Bass Podcast. Please like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, comment, all that normal stuff. Thank you very much for your support.